Hello, my friends. Welcome back. Stephen Cammarata here with WINEWORKZ. I'm reading to you Book 2 of Please Don't Die. Book 2 is entitled Please Don't Die, Dad. And this is where this shit gets pretty real. I'm going to try to get through this without getting choked up, but um, it's from the heart. It's something I went through, and my dad and I were close. I miss him so much. But if you're listening to this, I appreciate it, because I know that, when I see videos on YouTube that are more than 30 seconds, I don't want to fucking watch that shit. So if you're watching this now, thank you. And here it is. This is the final chapter of Book 2, Please Don't Die, Dad. The next book's going to be called Book 3, Please Don't Die, Tommy. And that's about my son and his prematurity. He's still alive, thankfully. Super strong as a bull. Book 4, Please Don't Die, My Friend. And that'll be, unfortunately, 15 chapters probably of very close friends that I've lost. That'll be a fun book to write, though, because let me tell you, I got some stories. I got some stories you won't believe. Some of my amigos and amigettes. Actually, I think they'll probably all be mostly guys I write about. I don't know. I'll think about it, but... All right, so here we go. This is the end of this book. It's a little long. I don't know how long, maybe 15 minutes, 20. I'll try to get through it, but Chapter 10, the end. Miss you, Dad. All right, here we go. It was October 29th in the year 1995. Dad was now under 100 pounds and only a shell of his former self. It was a hard thing to see. Growing up, I had never imagined a life without my mom and dad in it. It was just something I never really thought about. To me, it almost seemed like they would just live forever. Truthfully, as recklessly and as carelessly as I had always lived my life, I had always just assumed that I would most likely die first. So the thought of losing one of my parents and what it would feel like, it was just something literally that never once entered my mind. So sitting here now, looking at my dad and seeing how much pain he was in, I almost wanted him to die, just so he could be free. My mom and dad were both raised Catholic, and they raised us kids as Catholic. And we all believed in our hearts that there was no doubt that my dad would go to heaven. He lived his life a good man, raised his kids in amazing fashion, provided for us with everything he had, and taught us many important life lessons along the way. Yes, most certainly he was going to heaven, and now was the time. My sister Elisa and Gino's wedding was planned well before Dad got sick. The date was in mid-October, and the doctors at Roswell assured us that assured all of us, including my dad, that there was literally no way possible my father would be able to survive long enough to attend the wedding, much less walk my sister down the aisle, as he was so determined to do. The night before my dad died, he had mentioned how he had proved the doctors wrong, and how important it was to never let other people tell you what you are or are not capable of. As a backup plan, same beer. No, I'm kidding. It's a different one. Paying attention to that. But it's only the second one, so don't judge. All right, I'm getting sidetracked. I'm sorry. All right, so anyway, as a backup plan in case my dad died before the wedding, my Uncle Doug drove in from Virginia to walk my sister down the aisle. When the day of the wedding came, Dad was thankfully still alive, and still very much determined to walk his daughter down the aisle. Dad was so incredibly frail and skinny that his tuxedo had to be resized several times in the weeks leading up to my sister's special day. Even now on the wedding day, the tuxedo draped over his skeletal body loosely, but my dad stood up tall, and although in great pain, he would not let it show. He walked down the aisle with his oxygen tank being held by my Uncle Doug, and he slowly but proudly made his way to the altar to accomplish what doctors said most surely would be an impossibility. Dad had the biggest smile on his face that I had ever seen. I remember the night before my father died very well. I feel as if he knew that his time had arrived, and I also feel that he had control of when he was going to go. He wanted to die his way, on his terms, and not until he was ready. My sister and her husband had asked Dad if they should postpone their honeymoon because they wanted to be there with him in his final moments in this world. My dad forbid it. He assured my sister that he was the one who was in control of things, and he promised her that he would stick around until after they got back from their already planned out honeymoon. Looking back, I feel sorry for my sister Elisa because the honeymoon was most assuredly spent thinking about Dad, praying for Dad, and hoping that he would not pass away before she returned home to say goodbye to him and pay her final respects. Dad did hang around until Elisa and Gino returned home, just as promised, and I remember being so incredibly thankful for that blessing. Not only for my sister, but for my dad as well, because he had accomplished every single thing that he set out to do, and now he was truly at peace. There were no loose ends, and he could now meet his Lord and Savior with no unfinished business. There were no regrets, and there was nothing else that needed to be done. "Did your dad die yet?" I heard as I answered the phone and said hello. It was my friend Jason, whom you will meet in a later chapter in this section of the book, Please Don't Die, My Friend. Jason wasn't being rude. It was just the way he talked. He loved my dad a bunch, and he was sad by the whole thing, just as we were. But hearing him on the phone just now, you would never guess that to be the case. "I want to go bowling. I'm coming to pick you up," he continued. At this point, my dad could barely speak. As he rested comfortable on the couch in the living room, his voice barely audible and nothing more than a faint whisper. "Please don't go bowling tonight with Jason," he said clearly. "Dad, please. I promise I will only play 1 or 2 games and I will come right back." I pleaded for him to understand. This situation was tough on everyone, and sometimes I just needed a break, and I needed to get out of the house. "It's okay, Thomas. Let Stephen go with his friend. They will just be right down the street," Mom encouraged. "Stephen, before you go, please help me get your father into bed," Mom requested. As we lifted Dad out of his chair and slowly headed down the hall, I will never forget what happened next. With all the meds Dad was on, sometimes he showed signs of forgetfulness, almost as if he had dementia or something. But make no mistake, Dad was still very sharp and very much knew what was going on. As we headed slowly down the hallway, Mom on one side and me on the other, we made our way to the downstairs bedroom. Suddenly, Dad started to turning and directing us to the right. "No, Tom, your bedroom is on the left. Where are you trying to go?" In his last man of the house show of authority, Dad turned towards the living room. We let him lead us. He went straight for the thermostat to adjust the heat. Mom and I had a laugh. Dad then looked into the empty room, waved his hands in the air, and in a stronger than recent voice, he said, and I'll never forget this, he said, "Good night, my little pierogies." I had no clue what that meant, but it was to be the last words that I ever heard my father speak. True story. I seriously didn't even know what a pierogi was at the time, and I was more confused by Dad's final earthly statement. After my mom had explained to me that they were just a small dough dumpling stuffed with fillings such as potato or cheese, typically served as a dish with onions and sour cream. Made no sense to me, but that's the last words my dad ever spoke. With Dad safely tucked in bed, I gave him 2 drops of morphine and kissed him goodnight on his forehead. This morphine stuff was super addicting. I almost robotically and instinctively turned the dropper on my own tongue, but something inside me made me pump the brakes on that thought. Perhaps it was Dad's word earlier. "Stephen, please don't go bowling tonight with Jason." My reply to Dad at that earlier moment was, "Dad, you know I love you, but sometimes I need a break from this house. I need to get out and clear my head. Please understand." I don't think that my dad didn't understand, as I'm pretty sure he did. But however, I feel that Dad knew that his time was up, and he wanted me to be there with him in the end. I believe that he was the captain of his own ship, and he knew that that ship had made its final voyage and was now about to sink into eternity. And that's why Dad didn't want me to go bowling that night. My mom assured me that it was okay to go. When Jason arrived, I could tell immediately that he had been using the morphine drops that I had given him. I was relieved at my decision not to take any myself, because when we got to the bowling alley, Jason could barely keep his ball out of the gutter. We had ordered a pitcher of beer, and I poured out 2 glasses and approached the lane to take my first shot. Strike! I was feeling good. I couldn't help to notice on the table that both beer mugs were still filled to the top, as I haven't even had a sip of mine yet. But as my eyes wandered from the glasses to the pitcher, I was in shock that it was already half empty. In less than 1 minute that it took me to bowl my first strike, Jason had drank 3 glasses of beer. Morphine was funny like that. You could put down some serious alcohol without even realizing how completely fucked up you were getting. Jason and I always seemed to have this interesting phenomenon that occurred when we competed against each other, and this seemed to happen in no matter what activity it was. In this particular case, it was bowling. The worse that Jason bowled, the better that I bowled, and vice versa. Normally, losing to me like this would get him frustrated, but he was so high, I think he could care less on this particular night. In the final story of this book called Please Don't Die, My Friend, there will be a very exciting chapter specifically dedicated to my friend Jason. The stories that I can share with you about him. I could literally write an entire book dedicated just to him. It will be a great chapter of this book, and I know you'll enjoy it. I know you'll enjoy it. You better enjoy it. As our game progressed, I had a turkey going into the 4th game. If you are unfamiliar with what that term means, a turkey is simply when a bowler gets 3 strikes in a row. The term dates back over 100 years or more, when on these instances occurred when bowlers were actually given free turkeys. When I bowled my 4th strike in a row, even Jason was excited for me. I was definitely in the zone and bowling strike after strike. Going into the 8th frame, I was on fire. I already had amassed 7 strikes in a row, my personal best. As I approached the lane to attempt strike number 8, it was then when I heard this sound I will never forget. The loudspeaker sounded, "Stephen Cammarata, you have an important telephone call at the front desk." My stomach tightened and I felt instantly sick to my stomach. Hearing my name like that over the loudspeaker instantly reminded me of being back in high school when I was being routinely summoned to the principal's office for this or that infraction. I obviously knew that not to be the case now, but sadly I knew immediately that this obviously had something to do with my father. This was definitely not a good occurrence. As the ball loosed from my weakly gripped fingers and rolled aimlessly towards the gutter, Dad's words played strongly in my now worried mind. "Stephen, please don't go bowling with Jason tonight." Jason was so excited to watch me possibly bowl a perfect game that his suggestion was to ignore the phone call. That was not happening. I in turn ignored him and walked quickly to the desk to take the call. Even before words were exchanged, I could feel the painful tears welling up in my eyes. It was the calm before the storm. My eyes felt like puffy water-filled rain clouds laying dark and low in the sky, just waiting for the right moment to pour down on dry land. Was this it? Did my father just die? Did I miss his final moments? My thoughts were in turmoil as I made my way towards the desk. "Hello," I said sheepishly into the landline receiver. "Stephen, you need to come home immediately." It was not the voice of my mother as I was expecting that it would be. However, it was the voice of Teresa, our beloved neighbor of many years across the street. "Your father just died a few seconds ago. He was not breathing at all, and just when we thought he was gone, he came back to life," she said. "I think he is waiting for you, Stephen. But please hurry. You must hurry if you want to say your final goodbyes to him. Your mom is in the room with him now. His eyes are closed, but she is talking calmly in his ear, assuring him that you are on your way. Please hurry," she begged. And with that, the rain clouds that were my eyes burst open and the tears flowed beyond my control. I handed the receiver to the shocked girl at the desk, quickly kicked off my bowling shoes, and handed them to her. I politely told her that my friend Jason would close out our bowling tab, as well as the open tab we had running at the bar. "Is everything okay?" she inquired instantly. "No, my father just passed away and I need to leave right away," I replied with zero preamble. I quickly made my way back to Jason in only my socks and told him I had to leave immediately. Even in his quickly escalating state of euphoria, he knew that something incredibly serious had come up, and he offered no resistance. He handed me the keys to his car without question. He said not to worry about a thing because his girlfriend Beth was actually on her way here and would give him a ride home. To be honest, at that particular moment, I could care less if he had to hitchhike home or walk. All I knew was that I had to return home immediately. It was a tough ride home, which included not only 9 miles of tears, but several speeding violations and traffic infractions along the way. I didn't actually get, but thankfully, I didn't get pulled over or in an accident, and I made it home quickly and safely. My heart sank, and I had a huge lump of guilt in my throat as I pulled into the driveway. Was I too late? There were so many cars in the driveway, it seemed like. I rushed into the house and was instantly greeted by both my next-door neighbor, Ellen, and our neighbor, Teresa, who lived across the street from us. Ellen lived next door. They both gave me a warm hug and told me that Mom was in the room with Dad. "Is he still alive?" I whispered with great concern. "We think he is waiting for you, Stephen. Go in there now and be with your dad. Let him know you are here. His eyes are closed, but he can definitely hear your voice. Go to him now." This from Ellen. "Oh, Stephen, thank God you came home so quickly," Mom said with puffy, tear-soaked eyes. I couldn't help to notice that my mother, who was a nurse, had a stethoscope around her neck. This surprised me for some reason, and I'm not really sure why, but it made me feel uncomfortable. "Your father had stopped breathing twice since you left for bowling. We thought for sure he had died, but we all think that he has been clinging to life so you can be with him to say goodbye." It was at that moment that Dad's words echoed and replayed in my mind. "Stephen, please don't go bowling with Jason." I felt so guilty, and I expressed that feeling to my mother. She said not to worry about that now, but the important thing was that my dad was still alive and breathing, and that's all that mattered. "Please don't die, Dad. Please don't die." And this I repeated in my mind over and over for almost an hour with him, while I stood with him, sit with him, holding his limp and seemingly lifeless hand. The more I said it, the more I kept thinking it, the more I realized that it was already too late. It was selfish of me to pray for my father not to die. At this stage of the game, the proper thing would be for me to be praying about was perhaps that he actually would die. That type of prayer was just too intense for me to even contemplate. Instead, I summoned for my mother and asked her to go upstairs and bring me my acoustic guitar. Many years previous to this moment, I wrote a song called the Get Well Song. I had a friend who was in a coma and had been unresponsive for almost 6 months. I wrote the song for him and went to visit him in the hospital to play it for him. When I first started strumming, it was just he and I alone in the room, but when the song was finished, to my surprise, the room was almost full with nurses and patients who had heard me playing. Even in the hallway, people were rolling up on their wheelchairs to get a listen. It was an amazing feeling. However, not as amazing as the phone call I was to receive that following week. My friend Doug had miraculously awoken from a 6-month coma, and I decided that it couldn't hurt to play this song for my dad in his last final hours. Growing up as a kid, Dad wasn't really huge into me playing guitar. He hated it when the guys and I would have a loud and noisy band practice in the basement. He did often support me financially by helping me pay for guitar lessons and gear, which was super nice of him. Both he and my mom did show up for the open mic contest I did the one time with my good friend Dan Maurer, whom sadly passed, and you will be reading about him in one of the later chapters of this book as well. And our band, the Whiskey Goggles, at Gulliver's Nightclub. However, that is pretty much where his enthusiasm for me playing guitar ended. He shunned the idea of me ever being a famous rock star as a pipe dream, as he put it, or a wild fantasy that could never possibly come to fruition. I think the main reason for this is simply because he connected guitar and my love for rock music to that with my love for drugs. I suppose he was right in many ways. There was definitely a connection that was undeniable, and the proof and history of this personal connection was basically and unfortunately the story of my life. As I played my song for him now, I was fighting back the tears. There were no words to my song, only music. Even though his eyes were closed and I could still see that he was breathing very slowly, and it seemed like he could pass away sadly at any moment. I felt confident that even in his reduced state, he knew that it was me playing, and he knew that I was purposely playing a softer song that I knew he would hopefully like. As I finished my song and wiped my eyes, I could tell that it wouldn't be long before my father, whom I have learned so much from, cherished so many memories and good times with, and loved with all my heart, would soon take his very last earthly breath and meet his good Lord in heaven. Mom was on one side of the bed and I was on the other side of the bed, and we were both kneeling in prayer and silence. At this point, I had accepted that Dad was going to die, and I was now praying for him to go peacefully. "It's okay to go, Tom," Mom said softly in his ear as she gently caressed his shriveled hand. "Don't fight it anymore, Tom. Go be with God. It's okay for you to say goodbye now, Tom. We love you so much," she spoke softly. Slow went his breathing, as did the rise and fall of his chest, slower and slower. This was an unbearably sad moment for both Mother and I, as I'm sure you can imagine as you are reading or listening to this. No matter how much you try and prepare for something like this, when the actual final moments arrive, it's just so incredibly heartbreaking. I think, as I mentioned before, Dad was in control of things to some extent, and I feel that maybe he didn't want to die while my mother was still in the room. I think my mom had passively shared this same thought, because slowly she stood up with tear-filled eyes and soft and compassionate smile on her face and said, "Thomas, I love you so much. It's okay to go now. Go be with God. I am leaving the room now, Tom, and I will say goodbye now and leave you alone with Stephen." With this, she kissed his hand and softly placed it at his side. She then gave him one final kiss on his forehead and left the room, giving me an encouraging and loving squeeze on my shoulder as she exited the room for the last and final time. Looking back, I can't really say for sure how much time had actually elapsed since Mom had left the room and my father took his last breath and passed away. It could have been 20 minutes or it could have been an hour or more. I'm just really not sure, as in his final moments, time seemed to simply stand still. I will always and forever remember that final moment, his final and last breath on this amazing and wonderful planet Earth. I mentioned this monumental and life-changing moment at the very beginning of this book that you now hold in your hands. Watching that slow and final rise and fall of his chest, I heard the faint sound of Dad's final earthly breath in the form of a click sound. A soft and barely audible click, and then he was gone. My beloved father was now dead. It was hard for me to accept and even to process, and this despite 6 months or so of painful preparation for this very moment. I held his hand as he took his very last breath, and I continued to hold it. I'm guessing that I held it for close to a half an hour before I even let it be known to others that he had actually passed. Slowly, my soft sobs and tears grew to a loud and painful, uncontrollable wail. It was obvious to all in the house that my father had just passed. I had the kung fu grip still firmly grasped around my father's cold and now lifeless hand when I felt the soothing touch of my mother's, or so I thought, hand on my shoulder. With her other hand, she touched my hand that was still firmly gripped around his and encouraged me to let go. He is gone now, Stephen, and you have to let him go, she said softly and soothingly in my ear. Through tear-filled eyes, when I turned to face her for a hug and embrace, I was shocked to see that it wasn't even my mother, as at that moment I had assumed that it was. But however, it was my next-door neighbor, Ellen, who has been a close family friend since the first day we moved to the neighborhood. She held me tightly as the tears poured uncontrollably from my eyes. I remember and cherish that moment with great love for her, and I have always felt a deep and special connection to her ever since that day. Since Dad's passing, Ellen and her husband and family have remained a constant source of love and true friendship in our lives, and we are so blessed to have such wonderful people like that in our very tight circle. After he was gone, I went upstairs to Mom and Dad's bedroom, and I lay in bed. I laid in their bed with the door closed. I couldn't bear to be downstairs for all the formalities that were to follow. It was just way too hard for me to imagine watching his dead body being removed from the bed and leave the house. To this day, I don't even know if my beloved mother had the strength to watch such a thing. I've never asked her, and I'm sure I never will. I know for sure that Ellen remained there throughout all of the difficult tasks that needed tending to. As I said, we are extremely blessed to have friends like her and her family by our side in our life throughout the good times and the bad times. Another hard task that I clearly remember was picking out the funeral stone for my dad's gravesite. At the time of that decision, he was still alive, and I held hopes that the moment he would once again have another divine miracle, as he did many years before, and his cancer would just go away and he would live. I remember feeling like picking out the stone was equivalent in my mind on giving up on a miracle. And at that time, I just wasn't ready to give up. My mom, brother, and sister picked the gravestone while I waited outside. As it turns out, Dad had already picked what he wanted engraved on his stone. Besides a leaf, another symbol or picture that reminds me of my dad is a bear. He loved teddy bears, and he had several of them all over the house. Not surprisingly to me, he had decided to incorporate bears into the design idea for his stone. There were two bears carved, a husband and a wife bear, and engraved boldly above that it had read, "Love bears all things." Being that Dad was a beloved and cherished active member of the Lockport community, his funeral service was jam-packed. Hundreds of friends, family, patients of his, people he sold puppies to, even strangers had descended upon the masses upon St. Patrick's Church in Lockport to say their final goodbyes to this great man and pay their respects. Every single person was greeted at the door with a printed copy of my dad's eulogy that he dictated to our priests in the weeks before he died. It was to be read aloud during the service by the priest, and let me tell you, I'm sure there was not a dry eye in the entire church, especially not my eyes, as I was crying so hard I could barely see. I was 25 years old when I lost my father to cancer. He was 54 years old, and he died way too young. I often wonder how dramatically different my life would have been without him still here with me now. Physically, yes, he is gone, but spiritually he is very much still alive, and he is now my guardian angel, guiding me from above and helping to light up my future path and make good decisions, and help me always to do the right thing. The service that followed at the cemetery was also a packed event. The really neat thing about the exact spot where my father was laid to rest there was a very small Christmas tree several feet from where he was lowered to the ground. And this tree at the time was maybe about 8 to 10 feet tall. I have watched this beautiful tree grow over the years on my many visits to see my dad and to be close with him. Without exaggeration, this tree is now well over 50 feet tall and easily 2 feet wide at the trunk. In my mind and spirit, I envision my dad growing with the tree. It gives me great peace and comfort to lay my back upon this tree as I relax and say a few prayers upon each visit. Another neat and interesting thing is that Dad's Vietnam plaque was placed upon a small concrete slab in between the gravestone and the tree. And I would point out that this practically every other veteran has their service plaque secured to the back of their gravestone. I'm not sure why Dad's was done this way, but I really like it because it gives him his very own special real estate where no other graves can get too close. Although Dad is gone, I am truly blessed and I still feel his presence. Sometimes I'll be thinking of my dad and how much I miss him, and magically a red cardinal will appear right before my eyes. I was always told since a young boy that if you see a red cardinal, it means that someone has passed away that you are close to is thinking of you, or perhaps trying to send a message. Over the many years since Dad's death, I have had countless sightings of both leaves and cardinals. The leaf to me represents my father, even more so than bears. He loved leaves and he loved nature. One year, not only did Dad completely cover the spare car in brightly colored leaves, but he did the entire side of his brand new truck. It was one thing to do it to a spare car. He did it in hopes that I wouldn't drive it. But for him to do it on a brand new truck, I'm sure people thought he was crazy. To this day in my treasures, I still have 3 or 4 handmade leaf stencils that he used for this very project. One amazing example I would love to share with you now of how my dad still communicates with me happened to me about 5 years ago. I was at Angola Beach with my 2 sons, Thomas and Nicholas. Angola Beach is sacred ground for me because I grew up there as a kid and our cottage was right down the street. It is impossible for me not to reminisce and think about my dad anytime I visit this beach. And this day was a hot one, about 90 degrees. The sand was so hot that it burned the soles of our feet. It was, however, an incredibly windy day. And this truly is an amazing thing that happened. And I'm so happy to share it with you. As I watched my boys play in the water and jump in the waves, I was 100% thinking of my father. 100%. I happened to look down at my feet and what I noticed absolutely blew me away, and I cried immediately. Right where I was seated in the sand was a small stone shaped like a heart. And as God is my witness, as I write to you this now, there was a leaf underneath the heart-shaped stone. And it was flapping away in the wind, but still magically secured in place. Let me remind you, this was in the middle of summer on a beach with no trees. And there was not another single leaf anywhere in sight as far as the eyes could see. And this was, as you can imagine, a truly powerful moment, and I am very blessed to have had more similar instances happen to me over the years since my father passed away on October 29th, 1995. I was a very lucky guy to have such a great dad. My heart breaks for any of you who are now reading this that did not have that kind of unconditional love from either your mom or your dad throughout your life that I was so incredibly fortunate to have. Perhaps you lost your mother or your father even earlier than I had lost my dad, and you had to find your way without them. Or perhaps even worse, They left your life intentionally, which saddens me even more, like you have no idea. I am truly sorry if any of these scenarios is something that resonates with you personally. All that I do know and all that I believe with all my heart is that God does not make mistakes. And as confusing as it may be to understand and comprehend, everything in life happens for a reason. We may not know what that reason is. We may never know, but God knows. He most certainly does. And we have to do our best to accept his decisions and trust his plans and move forward with our heads held up high, our shoulders squared back, with confidence, positivity, and grace, and try our hardest to be the best possible versions of ourselves throughout our lives until it is our time to be called to him. I would like to end this section of the book with my father's own words, and the following is his eulogy that he wrote himself, that was read aloud to hundreds of people who joined us at his funeral, not only to mourn his death, but as well, more importantly, to celebrate his life. Cheers, Pops. That's kind of bad because my dad didn't drink beer. Okay, so this is it. Dearest friends, dearest family. Actually, I messed that up. Dearest family, dearest friends. 10/29/95. Rejoice with me today and be not sad, for today I am at peace and starting a new adventure. Believe what our faith tells us, that death is not the end, but a new beginning. The shaft of wheat must die to give birth to the new life. And this I truly believe. Today is a day to think of what we meant to each other. Today is a day for me to thank you for all you have given to me over the years. The constant support of family, the treasured memories of life that we have shared, in good times and in bad, with our dearest friends have become the cement of life which has held us together. You are, each and every one of you, indelibly etched in the fibers of my heart and being, and I take you with me on this journey. Those of you who know me best know what has always been the most important stuff in my life to me. Family first, then friends, and our relationship with each other, not status or money or power. Life is what is here. Look at who you are sitting next to. Really look. Chances are it is someone you love or someone who loves you. We come into this world with nothing, received into a loving group of family and friends who care for us and support us our whole life long. Look around. When we go out, the same ones are there, enriched by more and more family and friends gathered along the way. We are what people think of us, no more, no less. If we have people who love us, our life has been a success. Nothing else matters. In this I have been truly blessed. From the oldest to the youngest friend or family member, you have enriched my life in ways impossible to measure. You have been the flowers in my garden of life, and I truly thank you. To my wife Barbara and children, you know what is in my heart. You have been a source of constant joy and fulfillment, and you have made my life worthwhile. I am so proud of you and so thankful that you care for each other so much. I think Mom and I did a great job raising 3 great kids. Try to remember some of the lectures in raising your own families. Raise your children with loving discipline and teach them the values you've been given. Never be too busy or too tired to listen and to love them. Most of all, love each other as husband and wife. Remember, you come first, before children. If children know that their parents' love is strong, they'll be secure and happy, as I know that you are. Never forget how deeply I have loved each of you. If you remember that, I'll not really be gone, just in a better place where I can watch over you. And that wasn't supposed to be a sermon, so I will not say goodbye. I'll just say, till we meet again. I love you all, Tom, loving husband, father, grandfather, uncle, brother, son, and your forever friend. The end.